Hi there, my name is Neil Blevins, and this tutorial is called Thumbnails and Sketches. So the thumbnailing process is the process of creating small, quick design ideas. The goal is to get ideas out as quickly as possible in a tangible form, and then it allows the artists to pick the best ideas for further development. So in general, thumbnail sketches have these goals. Number 1, they should be fast to produce. Number 2, they should communicate the idea. And then number 3, you make several of them so you can choose the best. And to achieve these goals, thumbnails should 1, be small, and 2, not super detailed. And just so we get a quick view of what I'm talking about, these are some examples of some thumbnails. So these are thumbnails for a spaceship that I was making for a personal project called Testudo. Here's some thumbnails for the Story of Ink, the main ink robot. And then this is also from Story of Ink. In this case, this is environment thumbnails to figure out some environments to then do more detailed paintings of later on. So this is my art making process, which I talk about in another tutorial. And you can see that part of that process is the sketch phase. And the sketch phase is what we're going to be talking about today. And in it, I'm going to be talking about 5 different kinds of sketches that I do. And then also why you might want to choose doing one over the other. And then here's an example of the 5 different types. So we have the silhouette sketch, we then have the line sketch, the 3D sketch, the color sketch, and the photo sketch. So let's start with a silhouette sketch. So one of the most important elements when designing for a film or a game is a strong silhouette. In a book, you can stare at a design for a long time and notice all the intricacies. But in a film or a game, you may only see a design on screen for a couple of seconds. And in those seconds, you need to be able to tell what it is and what it's doing. So my buddy Bill Zahn, who co-wrote and did many designs for the Story of Ink, had a design rule that I always loved. You need to be able to describe a design in a single sentence. For example, a TIE fighter from Star Wars is a flying H, the Millennium Falcon is a plate with a chunk cut out of the front, or the simplest of all, the Death Star is a sphere with a crater. These are examples of good, simple, and elegant design. So if I show you just the silhouette with no detail in the middle, can you identify what these objects are? And chances are, assuming you've of course seen the films, you can instantly identify what ships these are in the Star Wars universe. And then another way I saw somebody mention it, which I thought was really cool, is can an 8-year-old draw the design and it's still recognizable? And if the answer is yes, again, you've achieved really, really good design. And silhouettes play a big part of that. So I tend to use silhouette sketches the most when I'm super focused on readability from afar. So I frequently use it for characters and vehicles, and so that when you see them from far away, you can instantly tell, aha, I know what that is. So as a quick practical example of this, for the Story of Ink, we needed to do a giant alien spaceship. And this was a mothership that was going to be absolutely huge, just kilometers in scale. And so I went ahead and I started doing these little thumbnails to try to decide what the final shape was going to be. And some of these are more complex. Some are, very simple in shape. Just playing around, doing a bunch of thumbnails, figuring out what the final design would be. And then this is the one that we ended up picking for the design. And if you want to turn this into a sentence, a good sentence would be the alien mothership in the Story of Ink is a donut with 2 long towers extending out on either side. So again, very easy to describe what it looks like with a single sentence. And then here is a very simple 3D sketch I made, which shows you how you can go from that silhouette sketch to the somewhat more complex sketch to figure out what it would look like in 3D. And here it is from a different angle. And then here is a rough painting that I did later on of what it would look like with more of the details, now that I worked out what the big silhouette was going to be. And then here it is inside of an actual painting, which shows up in the Story of Ink book. And then here are a couple examples of some other sketches from, silhouette sketches from other people. This one is Thierry Dozan. I hope I pronounced that right. Again, very simple, but I just love these little sketches as a way of figuring out what the final shape is going to be. This shows how you can do the same thing for scenes. So instead of it being a design of a particular vehicle or character, instead you can use very simple shapes. This from Molly Bang, who did a book of these, to show off compositions that would happen in a much more complex book. And then these are sort of silhouettes, maybe a little bit more detailed than normal, but I'm trying to figure out the architecture of these very, very large buildings. So the next type we have is line sketches. And line sketches are the first sort of sketch that we tend to think of, since we all draw as a child, and when you're drawing with pencil and paper, you are making lines that then form shapes and designs. And I tend to use this most when some level of detail is necessary to sell a design. Plus, this is also the easiest to do traditionally, so it tends to be more portable to make these little sketches. So here's an example of doodles that I make of these little robot heads. I do these at Drink and Draws and just for my own fun. But these would be totally useful in then doing a much more detailed painting or even 3D model later on. And I do the same with spaceships as well. These are a bunch of spaceships that I do in the same technique. So these are all traditional, done with pen and ink on paper. And here's an example from Scott Robertson that I thought was really, really cool. These are maybe half silhouette, half line drawings, but because you do still see that very strong silhouette, but you do see a little bit more details in the middle. So I would classify these as line drawings. And then, of course, another place where people use line drawings a lot is doing storyboarding. And this is some storyboards from Rob McCullum, who did it for Pacific Rim. So next comes 3D sketches, which is when you create something that's actually dimensional but low res in order to figure out a particular design. So I tend to use these the most when, number one, I want to move my camera around to discover new views, like for example, creating a simple environment and then moving the camera around. Number two, when the design has a lot of perspective. And while I can draw in perspective, drawing in perspective takes more time than setting up something quickly in 3D where you basically get the perspective for free. And then the other area I tend to use it a lot is when I want to play around with light direction. And there are lots of different 3D apps out there. There's 3ds Max, Maya, Blender, SketchUp, and it really doesn't matter what application you use, because everything can be made to use beautiful art, and certainly everything can be used to make these sorts of sketches. And then a couple of notes on cameras. So the virtual camera can act just like a real-world camera. And there are different lenses you can use to achieve different effects, like, for example, a wide-angle lens or a telephoto lens. And just so we're all on the same page, if you've done photography, you should know about this. A 20mm lens is a wide angle, and a 50mm lens is the human eye, and then 100mm is telephoto. And as well as different lenses you can choose, you can also think about placement, like for example, the height. So if your camera is really, really high up and you're looking down, that's a bird's eye view. If your camera is really low and looking up, that's called a worm's eye view. And then there's also camera placement in terms of the distance of your subject. So for example, a far shot, a medium shot, or a close shot. And these are all things that are very easy to experiment with if you mock up something quickly in 3D, which is a little bit more time consuming to do if you want to do all these in 2D. So here's a couple of examples of what I would consider to be a 3D sketch. Again, you can see very little detail. And these were all made for these robot characters. And as an example, later on I went in and did much more complete paintings on top of these 3D sketches. And here's another example of the same thing. These are some 3D sketches for spaceships, and then the final paintings on top of them. And then here's some 3D sketches that I thought were really, really cool. This one's by Georgy Simonov, and this is a nice little environment sketch of this giant wall. And here's another one by Ryan Church. I think it was for one of the Star Wars films, although not 100% sure, but just getting the sense of space in 3D, I thought this did a really good job of doing that. And here's another advantage of using 3D for your sketching, is you can make kits, and kits being these little collections of objects that you can then assemble into different configurations to achieve your final little compositions. And this is a little bit more complex and time-consuming to do in 2D, but in 3D it's really straightforward. So these two examples are by Sparth, and they are using Tilt Brush in VR to do little 3D sketches, which is a pretty intuitive way of doing it. So here's a little spaceship, and then here's something a little bit more environment. And another useful feature of a 3D sketch, as I showed a little bit beforehand, is you can use it as a base or reference to paint on top of for your final painting or a detailed 3D asset. And again, it gives you that basic perspective. So example I love showing off is this is work for Destiny 2 by Jeff Horrell, and this is a gray box level. I did a tutorial at one point, check it out on my YouTube channel, about gray boxing. But the idea is you create the very basics of what the set is going to look like and run around it with your character to see if it feels right. And then you can use that as a basis for the final level once you add all the details in there. And here's another couple of examples of the same sort of thing that he did for other parts of Destiny 2. And I did something like this very similar for a video game I worked on called Disintegration, where I got handed a really simple gray box level. And then I went ahead and made a very, very simple 3D version. And then did some reasonably simple 3D, a little bit more complex than what I would normally consider to be a 3D sketch. But then on top of that, that gave me the base to then paint the final design, which was used as inspiration for the final game. So 3D sketches using Lego, maybe you like playing with Lego and making stuff with Lego, and so there's no reason not to use that as your 3D sketch. And then finally, this one's from James Gurney. I love showing this one off because he actually goes and makes traditional 3D sketches, again, as a basis for paintings. So this is him making this little robot character in real life. And then here's a couple of little thumbnails that he also did, these little painted thumbnails, color sketches, using that as reference. And he places his little character in the real world. And that's an example of it in the real world on the left, and on the right is his final painting. So the fourth kind of sketch I want to talk about is the color sketch. And so the color sketch is something that I tend to use when color is a vital important part of the composition, especially used for environments and to show off lighting or time of day. And again, the idea of doing these is you want to keep it simple because you want to just shoot a bunch of these things out as quickly as possible and not worry too much about the details. So you can do something like this. I want to say took me about 10 minutes to make, but it's got the lighting and color information in there. And then here's an example of a whole bunch of different ones that I've done over the years for various projects, including Megastructures, The Story of Ink, etc., etc. And each one of these is just a really, really quick sketch that I put together to then, some of these ended up being thrown away and other ones ended up being the basis for much more detailed paintings. And then showing off a few more. These ones I think are really beautiful from Hans Bacher, showing off different little thumbnails that probably didn't take him a long time to do each one. These ones are really awesome. I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce this, but Zahir Aganani. Again, apologize if I got that wrong, but I love these little sketches. Again, probably didn't take them very long to do, but just has so much color information, so much environment and lighting information in them. These are exactly the sort of things that you could then dissect and then make a much more detailed painting of, or even a final film frame. Another example of these is Samurai Jack. Now these, of course, were backgrounds that were for the actual show itself, but each one of these is a perfectly good little color sketch that you could do to then do something much more detailed off of if that was the style that you were going for. And the final kind of sketching I want to talk about is photo sketches. And photo sketches is when it's faster to build your sketch with photographs and then a little bit of digital paint to hold things together on top. And I tend to use this the most when I have a lot of photographic reference ready to go, because it's then easy to take that photographic reference, bring it into Photoshop, and quickly paint over top, rather than starting something completely from scratch. And so one of the big examples I have of that is the work that I did redesigning the robot in The Story of Ink, the book project that I did a number of years ago. And because I wanted him to look like a construction robot, I had a lot of reference of different construction equipment. And so it was very straightforward to take that equipment and bash it together to come up with a bunch of different potential designs before we chose the final one. And then here's some designs by Feng Zhu, where he took a bunch of photographic elements, threw them together. In this case, then because they were spaceships and they were supposed to be symmetrical, it was really fast to then copy them over with symmetry in order to get some interesting designs. And another example, this was a technique that Scott Robertson first pioneered, and that was using the iPad with this mode which allowed you to put something up to the camera in real time and then get a symmetrical view of it. And so this is using photographs in order to come up with these really quick little designs. In this case, these are myself and little pieces of these little dinosaur toys that I had. And then from there, I could take, for example, that first design you see on the left, and then paint on top of it to get the final design of this little alien character. And there's the final version there. So one last little word if you're using sketches and thumbnails to present to a client. And that is, well, you can do hundreds of these little thumbnails. In general, I would edit out the ones that you don't think work, and then show them a more limited set of the best ones to choose from. So one technique I've used before, which I think I originally learned from Feng Zhu, is to show at least 3 sketches. And first off, show the safe one, which is something that looks 80% like things that already exist. Number 2 is show your favorite, so whichever one you like the best. And number 3 is the crazy one, the one that's kind of out of left field, really odd shape, just to see if they go for it. And of course, if they don't like any of those 3, make sure you still have all those other thumbnails and sketches you made around so you can pull those out quickly if you need to show them another set. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed watching this video about thumbnails and sketches. And hopefully the next time when you need to do some thumbnails or sketches for a client or for one of your own projects, you'll consider trying out a different one other than just the line drawing. Nothing wrong with line drawing, of course. I do them all the time, and there's a lot of reasons why you want to do them. But there's other reasons to use the other sketches as well, because they are better at certain things than the standard line drawing. And it's also fun to experiment, not only to figure out what works best, but also just to keep things fresh. So next time you're doing some thumbnails, try out one of the other types that you haven't done a whole lot and see if it works for you. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And if you want more videos like this, as well as written tutorials, go to neilblevins.com and go to the Art Lessons section. And if you want to be notified the next time I post a new video on my YouTube channel, please consider subscribing. Thank you very much.